you're not only the mayor of the secretary, sorry, of the Mayors for Peace for UK and Ireland, but you're also involved with the nuclear local organisations, nuclear-free local authorities. So you've got two hats, but it's the Mayors for Peace hat that we hope will be your main hat this evening. And we are technically Abingdon is one of those cities that signed up, or towns that signed up as having a mayor for peace, but 10 years ago, and that has been somewhat dormant. We're delighted that we're joined by Salisbury, the mayor from Salisbury, since they are the most recent town that I'm aware of, or we're aware of, to have a mayor for peace. But we look forward very much to your input, Richard, on the Mayors for Peace organisation and what we can do in Abingdon, or what any town can do to bring their local authority, their mayor, into this, under the umbrella of Mayors for Peace. And I gather you've also recently returned from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so no doubt you'll be giving us some information about that and your experience there. But welcome, Richard, and over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll just get rid of this thing that says it's being recorded in front of me. Good evening, everybody. And especially like to say good evening to our two mayors from Sint Niklaas and Salisbury. It'd be remiss of me, first of all, not to congratulate Salisbury on being the 101st member of the UK and Ireland chapter of Mayors for Peace. I'm delighted that during the time I've been in office, we've managed to get to the first century. So the challenge is now going to be to get to the next century. We can't hear you, Sally.
I was just wondering whether Lynn could.
Okay. Shall I continue?
Yep, yeah, I think we can hear you now, yes.
Okay, fine. So, yeah, so this evening, what I wanted to do is talk to you about, first of all, about how Hiroshima became a city of peace, a bit about the history of that city post-war, and how the city becoming a city of peace then led to the formation of Mayors for Peace. And then I also wanted to have a look at kind of what our work is in the UK and Ireland chapter, and what our priorities are going forward, and how you can get involved in that either as a signatory council of Mayors for Peace or as an individual peace activist. And as you rightly said, Sally, I wanted to, and Anne, sorry, I wanted to also talk a little bit about my experience recently on my internship in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So hopefully you'll get a fairly comprehensive overview of where we are with Mayors for Peace in the UK and internationally. So I think Sally's doing the slides. So do you want to bring the first one up?
Okay. Can you see that, everybody?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So yes, I've got two hats, as has been rightly said. I work as the chapter secretary of the UK and Ireland chapter of Mayors for Peace, and I'm also the secretary of nuclear-free local authorities. And there's quite a lot of crossover between the two roles. And my job is based with Manchester City Council. We're the secretariat of both organisations in the UK. This is basically a picture of me, as you probably gathered, in Hiroshima. It's actually about 2 days before the second anniversary of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and it's actually at the cenotaph for A-bomb victims. And we were taking some photographs to use with social media to promote the anniversary. So I'll talk a little bit about the Peace Park shortly. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, thank you. So this is, as you'll realize, a picture of the atomic bomb explosion at 8:15 on the 6th of August 1945. The reason I'm showing you this, though, is it's a slightly different perspective, because most of the pictures that we see are actually taken by the US Air Force. This is actually taken by a Japanese citizen from the ground, from about 6,500 meters, 6.5 kilometers from the hypercenter in the middle of Hiroshima. So I thought you might find that an interesting, different point of view. And it's actually a photograph that's on display in the Hiroshima Peace Museum. In essence, this talks about two things, really, I guess, two themes, because the city of Hiroshima is really about two themes, as I found it anyway. The first theme is one of tragedy, what's happened in the past. And the second theme is one of hope, which is what the city's doing to aspire to peace in the future. So that's pretty much, those are the two things that probably kind of this presentation shot through without, really. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is me in the Hiroshima Peace Museum. And here we have two views. We have a view of the upper view of the location of the Peace Park as it was before the atomic bomb. It was actually an urban district. It was called Nakajima-cho, and it was very busy, densely populated district that was bounded by several rivers. And as well as homes, it had temples, it had shops, it had restaurants, and as my guide, Mr. Harada, who'd actually taken guests around the Peace Park for 21 years, as he told me, as he proudly said, it also had 2 movie theatres. So it was very much a vibrant centre of the city. And actually the intended target for the A-bomb was actually just behind my right shoulder. There's actually a on the picture, that is, of course. The location there is called the T Bridge, and it kind of links 2 rivers. And it links those 2 rivers with the Peace Park, and that was actually the intended target. But the actual bomb went off some distance away, about 150 meters away, above a hospital called Shima, and it exploded about 600 meters in the air, causing a blast of 15,000 tons of TNT equivalents and about a 3,000 degree heat wave. Now, as you know, 70,000 people lost their lives pretty much immediately, many of those from this district behind me. But about 70,000 people subsequently died by the end of the year in Hiroshima, largely because of radioactive fallout or because of injuries they'd sustained on the day. One of the things that is very apparent when you visit the Peace Park in Hiroshima is how many of those victims were children. A number of the schools around the location of the bombing were completely destroyed. Almost every child and member of staff was killed. And there's a number of memorials in the Peace Park to those children and teachers. But also there were 6,300 students, secondary students, probably aged 14 upwards, who were actually working on that day, pulling down houses to create fire breaks. So they were working in teams with ropes and pulleys and brute force to pull down these buildings, thinking that would give the city some protection from fires if the city was attacked with conventional bombs. But of course, sadly on that day, it wasn't. And they were out in the open doing this work from 8 o'clock, and they perished as well. So there's another memorial to them actually nearby to where the museum is. The thing on the top right corner is actually the memorial to the hypercenter, the point where the bomb exploded. And if you've not been to Hiroshima, I can tell you it's actually quite spooky to stand under it and actually think that that's where the bomb actually went off. And that's it. It's a modest plaque in a side street. And in fact, it was only because my guide took me to it that I actually found where the hypercenter actually was. Okay, next slide, please. So I think when people think about Hiroshima, the first thing they probably think about is the image on the left, the A-bomb dome, the former industrial promotion hall that was built in 1915. Certainly when I saw it for the first time, and you kind of turn the corner and there's a restaurant in front of it named after peace cranes, and then it just takes your breath away. It's just an amazing sight, and quite, it really brings it home to you. And that's, I think, the thing most people know about the Peace Park if they know nothing else. The other view is the cenotaph, which I mentioned before. Now, the cenotaph is basically this archway with a stone underneath, and the stone actually says, "Let all the souls here rest in peace, for we shall not repeat the evil." And underneath that stone are actually scrolls of the names of 333,000 victims of the bombing, because ultimately that is the estimated toll of the atomic bombing over the period of time, due to people dying of cancer and shortened life expectancy, and also obviously children born who have suffered as a result of radiation exposure with the parents. And every year they actually take those scrolls out and they clean them and they dry them, and there's a big ceremony in May where that takes place in the Peace Park. Behind the cenotaph, you can't really see it here, but you'll see maybe the A-bomb dome in the back. But in between the A-bomb dome and the cenotaph, there's a flame of peace, and that is permanently lit. And the purpose of that is to actually extinguish it when the last atomic bomb is gone. So that's another very poignant place within the Peace Park itself. And these three monuments lie on a straight line directly from the Peace Museum, basically to where the hypercenter where the bomb actually went off, which is kind of on the right-hand side of the hypercenter. In fact, if you look at this picture, you might just see there's a very tall building on the very right-hand side of the photograph, and that's literally is where the bomb went off. Next slide, please. Okay. The thing, though, I actually found most shocking in the Peace Park, though, was this, which is a fairly unassuming structure, and would be probably fairly easy to pass by if you didn't kind of chance upon it. And this actually is the mound that was built to inter the ashes of the dead, the tens of thousands of dead from this district that died directly underneath the atomic bombing. So that's actually quite a shocking thing to see. And a multi-denominational service is always held here on the 6th of August when the commemorative event takes place, to remember the people who died in this area. Next slide, please. Okay, so you'll all be aware, obviously, that Hiroshima has a commemorative day on the 6th of August, which indeed Nagasaki does as well on the 9th of August. The Hiroshima Day event begins exactly at the time that the bomb was dropped, so it begins at 8:15 in the morning. It has, as do all Japanese events, have a certain amount of ritualism and structure. One part of that structure is that Mayor Matsui, who's the mayor of Hiroshima that you can see here, and he's also the president of Mayors for Peace. He reads an annual peace declaration, which obviously many of you will have been to your own Hiroshima Memorial Days, and you'll have seen that annual peace declaration, which is circulated the world over. The event is attended by foreign ambassadors and local dignitaries and residents, And apparently there was about 5,000 people on average attended each annual event before COVID. And the other thing that began in 1971 is the Japanese Prime Minister attends the ceremony. And you might well be aware that the current Prime Minister actually is from Hiroshima, which is one of the reasons why he is holding the G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima in May. And that will be an opportunity for peace activists to meet and lobby world leaders. The other photograph here is another tradition, which is the lanterns on the water. It's common at night on this particular day to light lots of candles in lanterns and float them in the water. And water is very significant. I mean, Hiroshima lies on a delta, so there's a number of rivers around the city centre, but many of the A-bomb victims either drowned in the river trying to escape the rivers, or they died of thirst, essentially. So a lot of the memorials are around the issue of getting access to water, because it's incredibly symbolic to people in that city. Next slide, please. Okay, so just going back to a bit of history, really. So the first peace declaration that was read on the 6th of August 1947 by this man that you see, Mayor Shinzo Hamai, who was the first elected mayor of Hiroshima. And he can really be said to be the founder of Mayors for Peace, because he was the driving force behind Hiroshima becoming a city of peace. So here he is. This is him actually reading the third declaration of the city, and it's quite an interesting picture. The reason I picked it is quite deliberate, is because that you can actually see the officers of the occupation army, because Japan was occupied by the Allied forces until 1952. And it was customary for Allied officers to attend the ceremony and actually make comments and make a little speech. Now, in the second year of the ceremony, an Australian general called Robertson caused great offence to those present, because he basically said, in effect, the Japanese had got what they deserved at Hiroshima because of what they'd done during the war, and if they weren't careful, they might get it again. So he really did cause offence. Apparently, it was because they were under pressure from the Australian politicians who saw the occupation as too soft, and they asked him to toughen up on the rhetoric. So that's an unfortunate incident in the history of the peace declarations. And before the first declaration was held, there was actually an event at the shrine site, Gokoku site, shrine site next to what was the Hiroshima Castle, which has now been built up, rebuilt. And on the 6th of August in 1946, a minute's silence was held, which everybody in the city essentially participated in. So in 1947, Mayor Hamai was elected. He'd been the deputy mayor before that. He'd been very much involved in the clearance and reconstruction work in Hiroshima. And he established a committee to hold a peace festival on August the 6th of each year to demonstrate the spirit of Hiroshima. And you can see there, there's his book, Abingdon Mayor, just bear with me. So there's this book, Abingdon Mayor, which I'm actually reading at the moment, which is very interesting. And I was very privileged because the mayor of Hiroshima actually signed my copy at the beginning. So that was really good. But yeah, it's a book that's very much worth reading. I'd recommend it to people. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned about the commentary that was made, and it was customary for the mayor to speak, and also for the occupying forces to send a message as well. What is interesting with this message from MacArthur is that it's reasonably conciliatory. It's basically saying to people, warning people, the world, of the danger of atomic weapons, and that we need to heed the warning and move away from that and work together, because we now have the power to annihilate mankind. And it's actually fairly conciliatory. It's, considering the reputation of the man, certainly a lot more conciliatory than Robertson's comments were at the later event. But it's quite interesting to contrast what MacArthur says here with his later position, because when he was the commander-in-chief of Allied forces in the Korean War, he was actually dismissed by Truman because he was desperately lobbying to use the atomic bomb against the Chinese. So it's quite interesting, the contrast between the two, really. Okay, next slide, please. So I mentioned that Mayor Hamai was behind the program to make Hiroshima a symbol to the world. And what he wanted to do was, in effect, make Hiroshima a self-declared city of peace. So what he did was he set up various committees involving the business community, the various community groups, and the whole city officialdom. And he also enlisted the help of the occupation forces to kind of drive forward this program of reconstruction. And that's what that book is really about, to be honest, a lot of it. So here you see two images. You've got on the left-hand side, you've got the basic structure of what is now the Hiroshima Peace Museum, which was opened in August 1955. I mean, there'd been a museum before, which was like a random display of artifacts that had been kind of collected over the years by a doctor who'd collected them effectively in his own home and catalogued them. And then he caught the attention of Mayor Hamai and been engaged to set up a temporary museum. And then ultimately they managed to get the funding to establish this building. So if you were to stand in front of this, facing the Peace Park, that would be the image you saw earlier, where you saw the cenotaph and the flame of peace and the A-bomb dome at the back. So this is now a much bigger building. It's got two wings to it, and on the right-hand side is the wing where the conference centre is, which is actually where the Mayors for Peace Secretariat's based, and where I was working when I was on my internship. The other image that you see is the Peace Boulevard, that what they called originally the 100-meter road, wide road, that they wanted to have through the city centre, which is now the Peace Boulevard. So really that borders the Peace Museum, which you can see on the right of the road, and the conference centre, and then the Peace Park is kind of the other side of that, furthest away from the road itself. Now, of course, when the bomb went off, the trees were destroyed, essentially. Very few trees survived. About 160 trees to 180 trees are estimated to survive the atomic bombing. I'll come back to that afterwards. But Hiroshima actually launched a plea as a city, both to Japanese cities and to world cities, to supply trees to the city. And I think they got something like 55,000 trees donated. So that was kind of this symbol of hope that that the city would be reborn. So the city centre is very much about tree-lined avenues. There's obviously lots and lots of trees in the park. There are also things like there's a tulip bed, there's several rose beds. Most of those flowers are donated by foreign beneficiaries that have given donations of flowers, including, I saw several, for instance, from the local campaigns for nuclear disarmament within there, amongst others. So that's kind of the story behind the trees. In terms of the A-bomb dome itself, A lot of people say, well, why wasn't that destroyed? It was so close to the epicenter, the hypercenter of the blast. Why wasn't it destroyed? Well, the reason it wasn't destroyed is the center of the building itself, the roof, etc., was all completely destroyed. But because the blast came down from above rather than sideways, the walls remained intact. So it was kind of gutted, and everybody sadly died who was within the building at the time of the explosion. But it was actually a shell that survived, a skeleton. And there was, of course, talk after the war of demolishing it, because for older residents, particularly, it was a visible sign of the terrible injury that they'd suffered as a people and as a city. And it was actually young people that lobbied the city government to save the A-bomb dome for posterity, because they realized it would be such an incredible symbol of peace for the city. And it's now, in fact, a UNESCO recognized building. And the children and young people were also behind the campaign to erect a children's memorial, which was actually built in memory of Sadako Sasaki, who I'm sure a lot of you know the story of Sadako, who basically folded 1,000+ paper peace cranes after she was diagnosed with cancer, sadly, many years after the war. As a teenager, and she had a long and painful battle with cancer, which she bravely fought but sadly lost. But she's internationally famous for this tale about folding paper peace cranes, because in Japanese tradition, if you can fold 1,000 paper peace cranes, the theory is that your wish is granted. And obviously she wished for life, but sadly it wasn't granted. But this memorial is incredibly iconic in the Peace Park. So just a couple of things there. So I mentioned about, Mayor Hamai being behind the reconstruction of the city, and he was the driving force that got the Japanese government to pass something called the Hiroshima Peace Memorial City Construction Law on August the 6th, 1949. Now, why that's symbolic is because the law, to quote, aims at the construction of Hiroshima as a peace memorial city, a symbol of the ideal of making lasting peace a reality. So what in effect it did was it made all the plans to reconstruct the city compliant with the peace memorial city construction plan. So it was all, the rebuilding of the city was all designed around this concept of being a city of peace. And it meant that Mayor Hamai could secure more national funds from the Japanese government, which was no mean feat, given that you have to recognize that practically every Japanese city had been destroyed by Allied bombing in World War II. So Hiroshima was very much competing with many other demands for financial support. And it also meant, though, that Mayor Hamai could draw on the military land that was available in the city for reconstruction projects. And a number of those became public parks, for instance, because Hiroshima before the war was a major army and naval base. So there was a lot of land used for military purposes. And that was obviously in a peace city and anathema. So it was turned over for peaceful purposes. So the construction law was a major leap forward. As part of that, they actually decided that rather than rebuild the old Nakajima-cho district, which was the one that was directly hit by the bomb, they would instead devote that to peace memorial facilities. So it became the Peace Park. So the Peace Park covers about 122,000 square meters, and it was designed by Professor Kenzo Tange from the Tokyo University, and it was built from 1950 until 1964. I've mentioned the Peace Museum was opened in August 55. There's also a Peace Memorial Hall in the park, which was opened in 1955, which is run and paid for by the national government, not the city council. And that actually has photographs and testimonials of the victims of the A-bombing, which includes, by the way, some American prisoners of war, which we saw when we were there. And it, you know, and the other thing is I mentioned in 1966, the city council decided to retain the A-bomb dome, and that became a UNESCO heritage site, World Heritage Site in 1999. And the other thing that's happened that relates to this in terms of recognition is that the main building of the Peace Memorial Hall, where the testimonials and photographs are kept, was designated one of the most important cultural assets of Japan in 2006. So that again is major recognition of the contents of the park. Next slide, please. So moving on to Mayors for Peace. So obviously Hiroshima has been a city of peace really since kind of the late 40s, and the reality is that by the mid 60s it had kind of sprung up as a city of peace, and within that obviously there was an element of peace tourism, and people were exposed to the stories of the Hibakusha, the A-bomb survivors. But the next leap forward was really in June 1982, when at the second UN special session on disarmament, Mayor Takashi Araki of Hiroshima, then the mayor of Hiroshima, he made a speech where he called upon cities to transcend their own national borders and their own national sovereignty issues and join with one another to press for nuclear abolition, in effect, you know, saying cities are not targets. And that was really when Mayors for Peace was born, in effect. So the mayor of Hiroshima acts as the president of Mayors for Peace, and the mayor of Nagasaki acts as the first vice president of Mayors for Peace. So at the moment we've got the two mayors, Mayor Matsui, who we see in the bottom right on the left hand side, and Mayor Taui of Nagasaki, who you see a little bit on the top right of that picture. They fulfill those roles, and here they are. They're actually addressing the first meeting of states parties to the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Vienna in June of last year. Some of you may well have been there to see that. So Mayors for Peace has the status of being a special consultative body at the United Nations. So in effect, it gets to sit in on major conferences, and it's quite common for the two mayors to actually speak at UN conferences, highlighting the experience of the A-bomb survivors, the Hibakusha, and promoting the desire that there be no more cities suffering atomic bombing like theirs and no more Hibakusha. Mayors for Peace actually has now about 8,200 members, of which, of course, we recently welcomed Salisbury. And it has various Mayors for Peace, vice presidential and executive cities. And in the UK, Manchester serves as both a vice presidential and an executive city. And we're also the lead city for the UK and Ireland chapter. And there's a reason for that, and I'll kind of come on to that in a little bit. But our Lord Mayor, in effect, is one of the vice presidents of Mayors for Peace. Essentially, Manchester was the world's first city to declare itself nuclear free on the 5th of November 1980. And that was in response to the then Conservative government's demand that local authorities prepare civil defence in the expectation during the Cold War that there might be the possibility of nuclear war breaking out. And Manchester was one of the cities to say this is utterly pointless. The nuclear war isn't survivable, and a complete waste of public money that we can devote to real public services. So essentially Manchester refused to play ball, and about 2,000 cities around the world followed Manchester's example. And in 1981, 73 UK councils met in Manchester, and they formed the Nuclear Free Local Authorities Network. So Nuclear Free Local Authorities originally was around solely campaigning against nuclear weapons, civil defence, but it's now more focused on nuclear power. So in addition to being Secretary of Mayors for Peace, I'm also the NFLA Secretary. But because of its background of being a nuclear-free city, Manchester was invited to become a vice presidential city of Mayors for Peace. And that's something that we've been delighted to fulfill. How Mayors for Peace functions is essentially that there are general and executive conferences. So there's a general conference held every 4 years. It alternates between Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The next one will be in Nagasaki in 2025. All members of Mayors for Peace are invited to attend that. And I should imagine it will be a virtual attendance as well as in person. And then there's also executive conferences. So that's where the executive and vice presidential cities meet in between, and often they're in Europe. The next one will actually be in 2024, and it may well be in Manchester, who knows, that's a possibility. And then in addition, individual countries have their own chapters. So, you know, there's a French chapter, there's a German chapter, there's an Italian chapter, etc. And we have a UK and Ireland chapter. But in Europe, we also have a European chapter. So the executive cities across Europe meet on a regular basis to discuss common activity and aims. And we play our part in that as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, right. So this is probably a bit small. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, by all means. This is in effect the action plan of the Mayors for Peace network. In 2021, they adopted a plan called the PX Vision. So there were a number of kind of work themes within that. The key theme has always been to realise a world without nuclear weapons. So one of the things that Mayors for Peace is obviously really, really actively involved in is promoting take-up of universalisation, can't say that word, of the TPNW by getting as many nations to sign that. And obviously in the UK, as a nuclear weapons state, that's the effort's been especially intense here. And I'm sure many of you have been involved in campaigns to get resolutions through councils. And obviously Mayors for Peace agitates at a UN level to try to promote that, as well as within states and within chapters. The other thing that we're engaged in is obviously appealing directly to national governments to support abolition efforts as well. And Mayors for Peace also works very closely with civil society partners. So Mayors for Peace is a member of ICANN, is a very active member of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, as indeed is the Nuclear Free Local Authorities as well. But it works with a variety of civil society groups, and particularly in Japan, it works with groups representing A-bomb survivors, and also particularly medical and scientific professionals as well. The second objective that they have, which is a bit broader now, is that we've broadened it out to include the idea of working for a sustainable earth and society, and to, you know, build sustainable cities in which, you know, people are treated with respect and are able to access services and achieve the full potential. And there's been a big emphasis as well recently on trying to promote the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this has been partly driven by the European members, because one of the things that we're conscious of in Europe is that there are other challenges to peace that we face, like extremism in terms of either religious extremism or racial groups, racist groups, particularly targeting refugees. And obviously we've had the issue of terrorism, which of course, as I'm from Manchester, I'm all too sadly aware of. And these are maybe things that historically haven't been on the radar of Japan because it's very much a homogenous society. There's very few foreign people actually living in Japan. There's not those kinds of tensions that there are in Europe. So they've been traditionally always focused on nuclear weapons, absolutely understandably, but now we've kind of broadened the work around promoting peace to covering these other issues as well. And I think the other thing that's been quite interesting is in recent years is that Mayors for Peace has been very much interested in this idea of building a culture of peace with people, within either individuals or within communities or society. And the current mayor, Mayor Matsui, is the president, is very interested in this idea of peace education and peace culture being promoted as part of the Mayors for Peace organisation. So again, you know, it's broadening out more than being just about campaigning against nuclear weapons. It's about trying to address the need for peace in all aspects of our society. Okay, next slide, please. Oh yeah, so initiatives, and it's very small, this, isn't it? Initiatives associated with the vision. So yeah, just to tell you a few of these things. These are kind of specific programs that the Mayors for Peace is trying to promote. The big one is there's a big drive to try and achieve 10,000 members. We're currently at, it says here, 8,237 as of 1st of February in 166 countries. So that's a big thing that the mayor is trying to promote, Mayor Matsui, and it's certainly something that we're keen to do in the UK and Ireland. The other thing that they actually do as well in Mayors for Peace is they have petition drives, and this is something I'd particularly like to engage local peace groups in. There's a petition form that Mayors for Peace asks individuals to sign. And what they do is they actually harvest the signatures periodically and present them to the UN. So that's something that I would like to engage yourselves in after this event in May. The other thing is the Mayors for Peace is very keen to share the testimony from Hiroshima, and you might have heard some of those testimonials before, the actual lived experience of people who lived through the bomb, whether it's, you know, directly as first generation Hiroshima or second generation, the sons and daughters of survivors. There's obviously a very keen interest in ensuring that as many local authorities as possible pass resolutions favouring their national government signing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And in the UK and Ireland, I'd counted up to 29 at the moment in the UK and Ireland, including we've got two. One was passed by the Welsh Senate and one by the Scottish Parliament. But these resolutions can be passed by any kind of council as well. Some of them have been passed by extremely small councils like Neffin in North Wales, up to major cities. This is something Manchester's especially interested in because we were the first city to pass a resolution in the UK. So that's one of the other things. And the other area is obviously to ask member authorities to mark Hiroshima and/or Nagasaki Day and possibly the UN International Day of Peace. I know that many people do that. I'm sure many of you are engaged in those activities already. And it might be a modest event, it might be a much bigger event, but these things all matter. And if, as and when you do have peace events, please do share pictures and texts with me, because I'd love to share those with the Mayors for Peace Secretariat in Hiroshima. They're always really delighted to see the activities of UK and Ireland chapter members. And I mentioned before peace education. Again, they're very interested in promoting peace education. Amongst the resources that they have is an Avon poster exhibition that can be put on display in public buildings. And again, if after this event anybody's interested in looking at accessing that, if you can let me know, I'd be happy to work with you on that possibility. And one other area is that the Mayor of Hiroshima has recently declared November a month for the culture of peace. So if anybody wanted to organise a cultural event around an issue of peace, it doesn't have to be related to the nuclear abolition campaign necessarily. It can be some other element of peace building. Again, I'd be very interested to hear about those, because that's something that I certainly want to be promoting to members in future. And there's also an annual arts competition for children and young people as well. And last but not least, something that I am absolutely passionately committed to promoting is access to seeds from survivor trees from Hiroshima. And I'm glad to say, I think there's some people on here from Oxford. I'm glad to say that Oxford City Council is literally just today submitting an application to receive seeds from survivor trees. And we're always delighted to have applications, and that's something I'll be pushing quite actively in the next few weeks, to try to get as many UK member authorities to take up that offer. So I'll come back to that because it's something I'm really interested in. Next slide, please. So in terms of our priorities in the UK and Ireland, I mentioned building membership, and we're now up to 101. Yeah, we want to do that. We want to see more councils pass resolutions, and I'm happy to work with either councils, councillors, or local peace groups to make that happen. Before I got this job with Mayors for Peace, I was actually employed by Yorkshire Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. I actually led on the ICANN Cities Appeal work, so quite a few local authorities in West Yorkshire actually passed the resolution with my support at the time. So it's something I'm really interested in. We want to build activity amongst our members. So again, this is why I was stressing about it's good if you can mark Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day, if you can have petition drives, if you can have the Avon poster exhibition up at some point, that'd be really good. We want to see more peace trees planted, and one of the things I'd like to do is record where those are within the UK, as well as any peace trails or peace parks, because we'd really like to document those so that we can make them available on our website to ensure that people are aware that when they visit a town or a city, there might be something related to peace that they can visit while they're there. One thing that is unique to Britain is that we're very active in supporting the campaign for justice and compensation for Britain's nuclear test veteran community. You know, we're now, over 70 years from our first nuclear test. The Prime Minister has announced that veterans can access a medal, commemorative medal, for their participation in the nuclear test, which is some progress, but there's been no offer of compensation. Britain is the only nuclear test country to have not offered any compensation to its nuclear test veteran community. And it's interesting that for nuclear test veterans from Britain who participated in tests in the United States, they can actually access money from the US government, but not from their own. So this is something that we've been very heavily involved in the last year. And the last priority for us is working with partners on joint campaigns. You know, we're very conscious of the fact that we're now at a point where we might see the reintroduction of US nuclear weapons onto Britain's soil. So we work with, ICANN in the UK, we work with a campaign for nuclear disarmament, we work with Quakers, we work with Newt Watch. I saw Nigel was on. Hello, Nigel. about the Trident warhead convoys, which is something obviously that our local authorities are very concerned about. And we work with the NFLA members. So we're very much into partnership, and something I'm very keen to do is work with our European partners more as we move forward in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, bit lighter. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my visit to Japan. As the chapter secretary, I was invited to go to Hiroshima to work for 2 weeks with the Mayors for Peace Secretariat, which is based in the building on the top left, literally on the left of that picture. So this is this is kind of the fountain and the square in front of Peace Boulevard that you saw earlier, and the Peace Museum is kind of behind the location of the offices on the left. So I was there for 2 weeks, some of the time in the office working with colleagues, finding out what they did, and all the colleagues are shown on the bottom left-hand side. But also I went out and about, so I met A-bomb survivors and heard testimonials. I spoke with the memorial readers who go to schools and community centres, taking out the testimony of Berkshire who are now too ill or too old to do that firsthand. And it's quite interesting, the middle picture, if you look at the 4 people, and I'm in that picture, the lady actually stood on the right of me. Amazingly, had actually come to my hometown of Oldham several years ago and actually did an event with our youth council, and I kind of half recognised her in the meeting, so I kind of dropped a hint, and she did admit that she was one of the people that came on that, which was just an amazing coincidence. And the other thing I did, as one of the things I did as well, was go to a high school, which is in the top right hand corner, where I spoke to English speaking students about the work we were doing in the UK and exchange views about what they were doing for peace and how we could work together for the future. So I'm hoping that that can be turned into an exchange opportunity at some point. And the last picture is me with the mayor making a presentation to the mayor. Next slide, please. But the other thing, that a lot of that was programmed, it was timetabled, it was arranged by the secretariat. But the other thing was there was an opportunity for me to do things that I was particularly interested in. So the things I was interested in, one was on the top left. I mentioned the survivor trees. One of the things I wanted to do was go and visit the survivor trees. And in fact, I saw quite a lot of the survivor trees around the city centre and took photographs of a lot of them and documented them. One of the interesting things that I saw was this tree, which is in the Chicane Gardens, which is kind of a formal gardens that was laid out historically for the lord of the Hiroshima castle to use for recreation. And of course it was destroyed in the bombing and subsequently rebuilt post-war, but this tree was there throughout, and it actually survived the bombing. And it's a ginkgo tree, and it's the tree that actually all the seeds are harvested from that come to the UK. So in 2017, in a different job role as a volunteer peace activist, I received seeds from this tree from the mayor of Hiroshima, and we had an event where 2 ladies who were atomic bomb survivors came to plant the seeds in Oldham, where I live. And from those seeds, we've actually grown 17 peace trees. So far, 15 of those have been planted in schools and in public parks. So it was just amazing to see the actual tree where the seeds came from in the first place. The middle picture is actually, again, something pretty amazing that I actually went to see, which was one of 3 trams or streetcars, as they call them, Hiroshima, that survived the atomic bombing. Now, they were very heavily damaged. They didn't look anything like this. They were obviously rebuilt, but the basic chassis did survive of the tram. This is number 651. There's 652 and 653 as well. These were all built in 1942. Interestingly, during the Second World War, they were all driven by female students because the male drivers were obviously conscripted. So teenage girls aged 14 to 17 actually drove the trams, and there was a special school they attended where to learn how to drive the trams. Apparently in the morning they learned typing and sewing, and in the afternoon they learned how to drive a tram, which I thought was quite interesting. And then they actually went off doing the work for real when they were fully trained. And of course, sadly, many of these young female drivers died on the day of the bombing because 108 tram cars were completely destroyed. And this one was very nearly destroyed. And sadly, of the 89 passengers on the tram, only one survived. But it has been rebuilt, and it is actually now being run on public rail cars. So this one and 652, which has this cream and green livery, is actually still in service. And this is me visiting that with the staff from the Hiroshima Electric Railway Company. And I'm going to do a paper on briefing on this because it's quite an interesting story. The picture on the right, though, was probably the most amazing thing I did, to be honest, which was participating in a candlelit vigil to mark the second anniversary of the passage and entering into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Basically, Japanese A-bomb survivors had a candlelit vigil outside the A-bomb dome in the evening of the 22nd of January. And I was expecting to turn up and hold a candle and have a picture taken, but actually it was actually about getting stuck in to build a 1,500 candle street art installation that basically said, "Peace in Ukraine, no nuclear war." So I ended up assembling the peace part and putting all the candles out in jars and lighting them and setting it all up, which was absolutely incredible. It was the most amazing thing to be involved in. So that was that. And the other thing I managed to do was I visited Nagasaki, which actually wasn't part of the program, but I spent an additional week in Japan in order to visit the second A-bomb city, because it just seemed so wrong not to do that, having gone to Hiroshima, to contrast the two experiences. So I was able to meet with a variety of people, including the director of the Japanese nuclear-free local authorities, and also a professor on the left bottom who runs the Research Centre for Nuclear Abolition at Nagasaki University. And the big statue is actually the Peace Park in Nagasaki, where they have the annual commemorative event on the 9th of August, and that starts at 11:02 a.m., which is when the bomb actually dropped there. And that Peace Park that's not actually the hypercenter where the bomb exploded, that's nearby, but that used to be the location of a prison which was destroyed in the bombing, and it's now the Peace Park. So in both cities I made lots of contacts, I did lots of incredible interesting things, and as a result of that I've got a big long list of action points that I'm actually following up on literally as we go day by day. And I'm sure there'll be many exciting developments as a result of those experiences. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just the last thing really is kind of things you can do. Just reiterating what I said before, one of the things you can do is to sign the Mayors for Peace petition. So this is me actually signing the Mayors for Peace petition in the Hiroshima Peace Museum, and we were actually going to collect the signatures from the museum, and these two gentlemen gave me a paper peace crane, which we're very proud to say they'd made with flapping wings, and they then proceeded to tell me how to actually make one of them and showed me. And the guy on the left-hand side in the picture, he's actually a Berkshire. He was age 5 when the bomb actually went off, and he was in the city at the time. So there's a link in this slide to where you can get the petition, but again, I can circulate these after the event. The other thing that people can do is also follow Mayors for Peace on Facebook and also on Twitter. And if you could, look at our posts, I don't post them, it's the Secretariat in Hiroshima that do it. If you can look at those posts, and also if you can repost them and retweet them, that would be really good, because we're trying to build up support on social media and awareness on social media. Next slide, please. Okay. The other thing you can do is get your city or town to join Mayors for Peace. I must have known somebody from Salisbury was going to be here, Mr. Mayor. So there's your picture. And also, if you can, as I say, mark Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day, get some peace trees, some peace seeds. If you're a Mayors for Peace city, if you contact me, then we can see what we can do. You'll need somebody to care for the seeds, so botanical garden or a council parks department or a horticultural college or anything like that would be fine. And the other thing is, if you can work to get your council to pass a resolution favouring the UK signing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this is on the right, it's a picture of Aberystwyth, which was actually the last council to pass such a resolution in November of last year. But I'm working with at least 4 local groups that are looking to get a resolution through the council very soon. Next slide, please. And that's it. That's the last one. I thought we were nearing the end. So Mayors for Peace celebrate prohibition of nuclear weapons has given us a real boost to take forward the work, and I'm very pleased that the UK and Ireland chapter is going to be is being revitalized. We're planning to have a chapter meeting fairly soon, so Mr. Mayor at Salisbury, you will be receiving an invitation very soon, and that's either in person or virtual. So that will be a great way to reinvigorate our chapter for the coming year. So thank you all for listening. It's been a delight to talk to you. Hopefully I've not talked too long. I probably have, but I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that very comprehensive overview of not only the importance of Hiroshima and your own visit there, which was the wellspring of Mayors for Peace, but also an outline of what specifically individual towns and cities can do. Could I take up, before we throw it open to any questions, one thing as we have got Salisbury here, I wonder whether we could hear from Salisbury as to the process and the difficulties that they faced, and the any advice and experience that they can pass on to us here in Abingdon about the process of becoming a Mayor for Peace.
I think that's mainly for well, from my perspective as the mayor, it was hoping that we would have the political sway before we took it to the council for a vote. So the challenge was having the faith that we would have enough support going into the meeting that we'd be able to carry the vote. Personally, I'm not adverse to having anything where I lose a vote, but I'd rather be in a position in something like this where I have some confidence. And it was interesting that some of the confidence I had actually didn't stand the test when it actually came to the vote. I had councillors that I was expecting to support who abstained. and so we only carried it by one vote, which was effectively my vote. So it wasn't with the swing that I had anticipated. Obviously, different councils have got different elections. In Wiltshire, we elect our councillors once every 4 years across our parishes, which Salisbury City Council is a parish council. It's one of the largest in the country, but it is still a parish council. So although we're quite large and we are a very, very political council, I imagine Abingdon is. Although I've only visited Abingdon on a couple of occasions, I imagine it's quite political. So you've got to have a good measure of your councillors. If you've got elections coming up, then you might see a swing against the Conservatives in your local area, which might help you. One of the things which was really powerful, and maybe some of the others here might be able to comment on this, but we did have a really useful letter for which I had no influence on, but it came from the local dean for Salisbury Cathedral in his own capacity, as opposed to as the Dean of Salisbury. But he is, in his own right, a very powerful person. And he wrote a very nice letter in support of us becoming Mayors for Peace City. And that should have held some weight. I mean, if you can have something like that, when you do, when you decide to try and push this up the agenda and have it as a motion for, I would assume, a full council meeting at Abingdon. But it was probably something that wouldn't have happened in previous years. I can't ever imagine a time previously where it could have happened in Salisbury. So it was politically a moment where it was achievable, but it wasn't as smooth as I expected. Not on the night anyway. But it was. I mean, effectively, it doesn't matter. It carried by a majority, so it doesn't matter. But I was expecting a slightly bigger majority than I had. I was expecting an easier ride.
Thanks very much for that, passing on the experience in Salisbury. Yeah. Any contributions, questions, to Richard, or indeed to Tom in Salisbury as well? Peter.
Thank you. This is really just a question to Richard. Thanks very much for your presentation. Very interesting and very moving, actually, to hear a lot of background of how the things we know about now came to be. I was just wondering if Mayors for Peace are going to put out any press release or anything coincident with the major protests that's coming up in London on Saturday, the Stop the War CND protest there. Are Mayors for Peace in a position to contribute to that in any way, do you feel?
In terms of the Ukraine situation, the Secretariat has issued a recent statement relating to that we've circulated. I'm happy to send that to people present.
Yeah, that would be great if you could, yes. That would be very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, have you got any advice, or indeed Tom, the question of putting persuading one's local council to support the resolution about the signing of the treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Is there any advice on that and ways of approaching it? We're open to, or Nigel as well. Anything that you can add?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first?
Yep, thank you.
Well, there's two things, just to come back to the question before about joining Mayors for Peace. So there is a form that mayors complete to join, and the model resolutions, and I've got a membership pack, so it's got background about Mayors for Peace, it's got model resolutions, it's got the form in it. So I'm happy to supply that to anybody who wants it. And it's the same with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. You know, we have model resolutions that we can supply. London CND did quite a good nuclear ban communities pack that you can access online, that's got lots of advice, and again, it's got model resolutions. I know basically what I used to do in my previous job role when I was helping people to try and take forward a resolution is, obviously the most important thing is to identify councillors in the majority group that are going to be supportive, that are going to take it through their political group. And the first thing I would do is obviously contact a local CND group or peace activist group, and to find out if any councillors were active within that group. But the other thing to do is to look at things like, historically, if you've had Hiroshima and Nagasaki days, have any councillors consistently attended those? Have any councillors maybe made statements to the press in support of peace issues? And the other thing you can do is, if you look on council websites, every councillor has a register of interests, and often councillors will record in registers of interest things that are of interest to you. So it's quite common for people to record if they're involved in peace groups, or maybe if they're a Quaker, or they might be, say, very actively involved with the Red Cross. So obviously the Red Cross has issued lots and lots of stuff about the terrible implications of it, the use of nuclear weapons, which you can use to then approach the councillor to seek their support. As Councillor Corbyn has said, there are certain political groups that are going to be more inclined to support a treaty resolution than others. So it's always good, as well, as you can get cross-party support, you know. I mean, traditionally, I'll be honest, I've never bothered even approaching Conservatives. It's just a total waste of time and energy, to be truthful. But the other parties I generally would have approached in my previous job role. But yeah, if you can get cross-party support, that's even better. And then obviously the other thing is, if you can lobby people before the event, you know, councillors have ward surgeries. It's possible to go along to those to speak to people. You might be able to arrange to speak to them privately in the council chamber. Another tactic, if you're not quite at the point where you can take a resolution forward, is all councils have public question time. So you can always go and make a comment, an observation, or raise a question within that, where all councillors are present, to see how that flies, what response you get from it. And you might be able to ask for a private meeting from that with either the council leader or the relevant cabinet member, which should probably be somebody around environment or climate change. And those are some ideas. But again, I'm happy to talk to people privately about that, depending on their individual circumstances, because I think you have to look at each individual council on its own merits, because they all operate slightly differently, and there's slightly different dynamics that I'd need to kind of take account of first.
Thank you. Nigel, could you unmute? Nigel, can you unmute yourself?
There we are. Thank you for that. I just wanted to thank Richard for the bit about the survival trees, because I remember now in the distant past, about at least 10 years ago, we planted a seed and a tree from the survival seeds collection. So I need to perhaps go and revisit that place. There's a lot of people there, and there was somebody from Japan there as well. And we planted the tree, so I need to go and see how it is progressing, and to let you know where it is, because it's sort of on the back burner along with everything else, you know. But that's a good reminder that we might even have more than one. So I need to track them down and add it to your data list, really.
Okay, thank you. That would be good.
Sally.
Just to add to that, CND sent round a couple of years ago a lot of seeds from the survivor trees, and we got one, and I foolishly just planted it in a pot. And I had a message from Sarah at CND just last month saying what had happened to it, and it hasn't germinated. And she said, yes, what's happened to all the others that I sent out as well. But she contacted Kew Gardens and they said, don't despair. It can often take up to 5 years before they germinate. So I'm hoping that if we ever get the chance again, that we could actually give it to somebody professional who might know what they're doing, because I clearly didn't.
Yeah. I mean, if you had an application from a member authority of Mayors for Peace, you could actually make an application through myself to the Secretariat, and they would basically, what they do is they harvest the seeds from the ginkgo tree I showed you earlier, and they're then handled by the Hiroshima Botanical Garden that stores them until they're sent out. And then they come out with a certificate. You need a special certificate, essentially, that attests that they're disease-free to get through UK customs. And the thing that they do come with is when they're grown, is that you actually get a plaque for each tree. And the plaque is a unique plaque. It actually shows a picture of the mother tree. It says something about the provenance of the tree. And it also has a QR code. So the idea is if somebody scans the QR code, it actually shows you the location of the mother tree in Hiroshima. So it's a very useful tool, that, because obviously I've been busy going out giving these trees. They're about 2 foot tall, usually, the ones that we planted. And they come with this plaque, so it's a really useful educational tool, especially with school children, because around that there are a number of resources you can use. I've got quite a lot of CND resources that I tend to hand out to schools, and they often have special assemblies, or they have special lessons during the day that the tree's planted, where they can use these materials to promote peace. So it's a really, really useful educational tool.
That's a much better idea for you to get them germinated professionally and then hand out the actual trees. I think handing out the seeds on their own was perhaps a mistake.
Well, you would need to. We only get the seeds supplied. You would need to actually nurture the seeds, but what the requirement is that they're nurtured by a professional horticulture institute. So it's either going to be botanical gardens or a horticultural college or some kind of local authority parks department. And that's because the survival rate is not that high. You know, I think in Oldham we got something like 70 seeds, and we actually got 3 types of trees. We got hackberry trees, jojoba trees, and ginkgo. None of the jojoba tree seeds survived at all. 3 of the hackberry survived, and 14 of the ginkgo survived, and all the rest died. And that's under the care of an award-winning parks department. So you can see there's not a massive survival rate. So this is why they want them to be professionally nurtured, to give them the maximum chance of getting to the point where they can be planted. And it is several years before really they're able to be planted.
Certainly, it struck me that there's great scope for enlisting or making connections initially with the local council and the annual marking of Hiroshima Day, which Abingdon Peace Group has done for many years. Okay. On August the 6th. And we had some years ago a visitor from Hiroshima who was deeply touched that she could hardly believe that this market town in Oxfordshire still was remembering every year at the time that the bomb had fallen on her, what had happened to her city. But certainly, I think that's one thing we specifically need to do, is to look at how we might make more of that annual marking and build on it.
Yeah.
Any other, Peter?
I wonder if I could just sort of build on what you were saying there. As some of you know, Salisbury marks Hiroshima Day each year with a candle float down our local river. And in recent years, we've been lucky enough to have links with groups in Hiroshima, and they've sent us some of the lanterns from Hiroshima to join our own to float down the river. And that's been a lovely thing that's grown over the years. And this year they sent us some lanterns that were decorated by high school children in Hiroshima. And they were so excited that the Mayor of Salisbury had joined Mayors for Peace that other schools in Hiroshima also want to decorate lanterns and get involved with other CND groups or peace groups in the UK. And so I just wondered if I could use this to say, if any of you do have a candle float type of event around Hiroshima Day, I'd be delighted to make the links with schools in Hiroshima who would be very keen to cooperate with you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Any other contributions, comments, questions to either Richard or any from Belgium? Do you wish to add anything, Lieven, or comment on anything you have heard? How aware have you been in Belgium itself about Mayors for Peace? You are muted.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was most interesting to hear and to say what has been said and shown over the last hour and a half. Of course, what is happening in Belgium is pretty different in comparison to what is happening in Britain. Now, I've been Mayor of Sint Niklaas now for 10 years. And as the people of Abingdon know, the most important event in Sint Niklaas is the annual Peace Festival during the first weekend of September. Why during the first weekend of September? Because in September 1944, Sint Niklaas was liberated by English and by Polish soldiers, and that was the end of the Second World War in Sint Niklaas. Now, the commemoration of the end of the war has developed into a peace festival. The most spectacular aspect is the balloon event. You can compare it to what is happening in Bristol in August. And over the last 10 to 20 years, the memory of commemoration of the liberation of the town has got a bit in the background, and we try to revive the memory of what happened almost 3/4 of a century ago. For instance, we now also have a peace market with people. We have about 120 nationalities in Sint Niklaas, and we are a town of 81,000 inhabitants, but many people from many different backgrounds. Second is that we have also installed a peace prize or a peace award since 2 years ago, and also last year, for the first time, we unveiled a kind of cobblestones for people who died or were taken prisoner during the Second World War or were in the resistance. and in front of their houses there is now that cobblestone. They call it. It was something that was started in Germany, and there are about, I think, 90,000 of those stones all over Europe since then. A last thing that we've done over the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, that we have several war memorials, and well, veterans and people of members of patriotic societies, they lay a wreath there at ceremonies. And now we've asked some schools in the neighborhood to adopt the monument, so that the children know what the monument is about and they take care about the monument. So in this way, we try to focus attention on the memory of the second and also of the First World War in our town. But in the town council, we try to avoid debates about national and international issues, because, well, it would rather polarize the debate than bring people closer together.
Thank you very much indeed for even though both Pete and I are very active in twinning, to be honest, I had always associated that first week in September merely just with the balloon festival, and I hadn't realized that it has where its roots are, and that its roots are in peace. So
that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much for highlighting that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Which I can certainly take back to the Twinning Society as such, because I think that's got rather overlooked. So I think from the contributions that we've had this evening from both from Sint Niklaas and from Salisbury, and has given us food for thought in Abingdon as to how things that we might, ways of proceeding with what we already do in a very small way, and how to magnify those, and how to make progress both within Mayors for Peace, but also highlighting what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and raising awareness of that, because at the moment there seems to be such a need for even more highlighting of the dangers of nuclear warfare in the present situation in the Ukraine, that the need for that public awareness is greater than ever. Tom.
Yeah, I think from a Salisbury perspective, we are a really, although we are a parish council, we are very, very strongly political. You know, every councillor has to fight for their seat against other political parties. But certainly from a Salisbury CND perspective, I mean, I'm not a member, but I have always been conscious of candle floats and different aspects for which the local members have obviously put in lots of effort to put in events. And so I should also add, I've also been a parliamentary candidate. So, I mean, I've been invited along to talk and to give the Labour Party view of the day and my views. Maybe I've been a little bit guarded when trying to protect the parliamentary position of the day, because it's never going to be completely nuclear free, is it? Let's be honest. But it's the power of the local activists, is what I'm really saying. It's how you reach across in your local community. So the suggestion of Richard's about going to a council meeting and putting a question, and the question doesn't have to be sort of an outright, would you support nuclear disarmament? It can just be a very simple something along the lines of, you know, what are you doing for supporting the families of Ukraine? Something along those lines. You can sort of go outside of where your core concerns and interests are, and just see how councillors respond to certain aspects. We have an interesting thing happening in Salisbury. We've got some artwork coming, which is it was put up in Oxford. So it's sculpture. If you think back to the 2018, and we had the 100-year anniversary of the First World War, and we had some sculptures put out that were sort of silhouette kind of features of First World War soldiers. It's this is called Standing with Giants, and it's a very large metallic cutout, a steel sheet. It's 12 foot tall, and it basically depicts what is supposed to be a Ukrainian family, or perhaps a soldier escorting a woman and children, refugees. And certainly Salisbury has a very active community trying to support Ukrainians at the moment. That kind of artwork, although it should arrive in the city tomorrow, in our Guildhall Square, obviously it also coincides with the year's anniversary. There are things like that that you can kind of perhaps encourage. The only reason I particularly make mention of this artwork is because I know it should be available to go on tour. And so if there's an interest in taking it on and having it feature in Abingdon, for example, then there's that possibility. So you could use that as an excuse for a reason to raise this at a council meeting. Say, hey, we've heard about this. It's featured in Salisbury. It started in Oxford. We'd like it in Abingdon. Would the council support its display? Something along those lines, and just see what sort of reaction you get from the different groups of councillors that you have. And also, it's obviously a very current issue. And then maybe it gives you an in later for being a respected part of the community, that they think, oh, that's that person that introduced this nice bit of artwork. Maybe we'll listen to them a bit more carefully when they start talking about something we're not so comfortable with.
Yeah, wise advice. Yeah, thank you. Any other, perhaps at this stage, final comments or questions to Richard or Tom or Nigel? Okay. A last call. Well, thank you. Can I just say thank you very, very much indeed, Richard, for your input. That was really, it was informative, it was helpful, though it brought back personal memories with when Pete and I visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki some years ago, and what a moving experience we found, and a sort of a personal kind of affirmation that a commitment to ridding the world of nuclear weapons is something which should be deep in all our hearts. But thank you very much, Richard, and knowing that we can come back to you for resources and what other things that you've mentioned in the course of your presentation. And thank you very much to Salisbury as well for your experience and passing on information and advice that would be helpful to us and to others on the Zoom, and Nigel also, and also a special thank you to the Mayor of Sint Niklaas for joining us and giving us that international perspective as well, and as one of Abingdon's twin towns, a very pertinent one for us here in Abingdon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.